I'm delighted to welcome you to this important webinar. This is a joint webinar to launch the Paris 21 Mo Ibrahim Foundation Joint Report, Bridging the Data Policy Gap in Africa. My name is Sasha Ramirez-Hughes. I'm the Communications and Partnerships Manager at Paris 21. I'll hand things over to Johannes Uting, who's the Executive Head of Paris 21, to start things off in a moment. But before you do, I would just like to let everyone know that this session is being recorded, so I hope that's okay. And there will be an opportunity for everyone to ask questions at the end. Apologies for the confusion before. Please do that via the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. So without further ado, I'm very pleased to welcome Johannes to the stage to open the session. Thanks very much. Over to you, Johannes.
Thank you very much, Sasha. Good morning, good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to open this very important webinar to host this exciting paper, Bridging the Data Policy Gap in Africa. And we are very delighted to do this together with our colleagues and friends from the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. It's a first time that we do this, and we are very excited that we had this opportunity to work with colleagues from the Mo Ibrahim Foundation on this important topic of turning data into good policy in Africa. From the perspective of Paris 21, this is quite exciting, and I just wanted to maybe say just one word in terms of an introductory remark, why I think that this topic of data and statistics, as well as turning data into good policy and better lives, is so important at this very moment. Now, just a couple of days ago, the IMF has released its latest figures in terms of economic forecast of the different countries and regions in this world. And maybe some of you have seen that, for instance, the US is forecast to grow at a growth rate of 6.5%, while the whole African continent is on average to be growing at something like 3%. This hasn't happened for several decades. The African continent has been, over the last time, catching up significantly, and in particular some countries, thanks to the resource and mineral and oil boom. In that sense, this reduction of growth rates, the increase of the challenges linked to the consequences of the COVID crisis, makes it really important to look at the issue of how can we, as hopefully the pandemic pans out in a couple of months, how can we design inclusive recovery mechanisms, and how can we get back to a productive path? This will be one of the main challenges for African countries for the next couple of years. And the prospects are actually rather gloom, one has to say so. Yet, I think that there is also a little bit of light, and the little bit of light is that many African countries and governments now see that data and statistics are really critical for good policy making and for better lives. So in that sense, turning good data into good policies for better lives has become, for many African countries, actually an important point in time. So we are very delighted that we have this technical paper, this working paper here, which offers 6 exciting ways of how to do that, how to turn good data into good policies. And let me just maybe pick 2 out of the 6. We will hear from them in just a couple of minutes when the colleagues will present the report in detail. But from my perspective, where I stand, there are 2 quite interesting ones. One is the storytelling part. Often we miss this part of that we need data. We make often technical arguments, but we are not yet fully able to tell convincing stories in terms of how we can use data to really make a difference. And in today's world, where we had the COVID crisis and where we see all this increased interest in data and statistics, where we have dinner conversations about R values and about infection rates, this is the moment now to use this opportunity also in African countries to lobby for more and better data, to investment in national statistical office and foundational data. So the storytelling part is really critical, and maybe we can have some further conversations about this as we go along. The second point I would just wanted to highlight from the 6 conclusions is, and then I will stop, is the statistical law sides of things. Laws and regulations are very, very critical. Everybody is talking about now matching different data sources, using private sector data, using civil society data, but without appropriate regulation and standards and laws, we will not go very far. So as we all know that African countries in terms of their institutional frameworks are lagging a little bit behind, this is a rather even more complicated challenge. But on the other hand, we have seen a lot of interest. We have a couple of countries that are very far ahead of the curve. And I think this gives us good optimism to look forward. So with this, I'm very excited that we have this conversation today. And I'm looking very forward to an interesting conversation. And let me give the floor back to Sasha and then hand over to our colleagues from the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. Thank you very much, Sasha.
Thanks very much, Johannes. Excellent framing. I mean, I think, COVID-19 as both a shock to the system, unprecedented in many respects and unforeseen, and has the potential to set back development in a number of contexts. But at the same time, to some extent, a catalyst as well in terms of accelerating innovation, driving interest in statistics and data. So to see how this will change the landscape certainly will be especially interesting. So with that, I'm delighted to hand things over now to Nathalie De Palme, who's the Executive Director of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, who will also be providing her perspectives on the issue and setting the scene for us. Thanks. Over to you, Nathalie.
Thank you very much indeed, and apologies for joining late. I think it's, as you both said, as Joanna's highlighted, it's a key moment. It's a key moment for a key topic, actually. And to be frank, MIF has been committed from the beginning to strengthening data and statistics. I would even say that, in fact, this is the founding stone of the foundation, because foundation is focused on strengthening governance and leadership. But fact is that there is no sound governance or no sound leadership without sound data. You need to know where you are coming from, where you want to aim at, and if you're going there correctly. This is at the basis of governance and leadership. And we often used to say at the foundation that we should probably have had an SDG number 1, which would have been sound data for governance, because everything begins by data. You can't drive blind. When you are in the driving seat or whether you are being driven, you need to know where you are and where you're going and whether you're going there currently. And this is one of the reasons, of course, where we have focused most of our resources in producing that annual index now every 2 years, which is covering all 54 African countries with something like 100 indicators that are taken from the best available sources. There we have an issue. There is still too few African sources or robust enough African sources. And to be frank, MIF is not a grant-making organization, but our main financial support, and I would say expertise support, goes to these partnerships, either with African institutions to deliver data, such as Afrobarometer, for example, or to organizations to make sure that they spread their data research to the whole continent, for example, World Justice Project. And I think indeed, as Johannes said, and you also, we have a key issue here, and probably it's an elephant in the room. Providing data and saying providing data is a key issue like green economy or justice or equality. I would even go further. I would say that you can't have a good economic recovery, you can't have a green recovery, you can't deal with climate change, you can't deal with pandemics if you don't have the data. So you need to begin by getting the data. Everybody today talks about fake information, misinformation, the power of information. This begins with data. If you look at SDGs implementation, I think that there is probably no more than half of the indicators provided by SDGs where indicators can indeed be fully and trustfully monitored because of the lack of data. Look more closely at COVID monitoring in Africa. There is only 8 countries in Africa who have a decent death registration system? How can you be sure of the data that are currently delivered on COVID cases and COVID deaths when it comes to Africa? You just can't. So we can say, oh, COVID is not hitting Africa so hard, but are we really sure about that? I'm not sure. And another point, which is a key point, and Johannes underlined it already, this is not a matter of discussions between experts, data providing, data sourcing, getting data. It is a political matter. It's a matter of ownership and sovereignty. Once again, you can't drive a policy, a sound policy, without sound data. So indeed, I mean, we are extremely happy to join OECD in this key report to support the development of statistical capacity. We don't intend, of course, to be prescriptive because this is not our way of working with our African partners, but we see our main contribution exactly there. We need data to support strengthening data. We need first to map exactly the statistical capacities of African countries and to do this at a granular level, not just seeing the Africa continent as a whole, because we have 54 different countries with different situations. And we need to make the case again and again of the key strong link between sound data and sound governance and efficiency of public policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Natalie. That's a wonderful introduction. I think taking the conversation to the high level, I mean, as you said, and I love that quote, there's no sound governance and leadership without sound data. And of course, we need data to support strengthening data. You know, as you said, this is a question, while many people in the data sector and at the technical level take it for granted, you know, the fact is that this is not manifested in terms of data-rich policies and data-driven decision-making across the board. And part of the issue is that it's also a political issue, as you say. So it's not only a matter of discussion between experts, as you put it. So I think that's a very nice segue into a deeper dive into some of the findings of the report. And with that, I'm pleased to hand things over to Julia Schmidt, who's a policy analyst at Paris 21, and Camilla Roca, who's the head of research at Mo Ibrahim Foundation, who will give us an overview of the key recommendations of the report. Thanks. Over to you, Julia and Camilla.
Thanks, Sasha. I hope everyone can see my screen. Warm welcome from my side. So I have the pleasure to, is that fine, the screen sharing?
Yes.
Yeah. So I have the pleasure to give you a quick glimpse into some of the key recommendations of the report. And as you see, we called the report Bridging the Data and Policy Gap in Africa because we looked at two sides, the statistical perspective from the National Statistical System and Office, and also the policymaking perspective. And I will just focus on the statistical perspective, and then Camila and Diego will give you some overviews over the policy perspective. So let me start with the general questions. What do we mean when we speak about a data policy gap from a statistical perspective? And I think it's really important to say that we observe this gap on the African continent, which we call data policy gap because we've seen that statistical capacity has been progressing and improving, but the use of data and policy documents, which is one indicator of that gap, is not yet that high. And that's what you see in this graph. It is important to also say that it is an area that requires way more research because it concerns data use as much as data production. The production side we know fairly well, but the use side we have difficulties to measure, as we know. We at Paris 21 measure it with the indicator that you see is here displayed, which is an indicator that measures the use and level of statistics in policy documents. But we also know now with the publication of the Statistical Performance Index from the World Bank and other measures that use is really an area to explore further. So we know that the statistical capacity has improved. We could see positive trends in the World Bank indicators and Mo Ibrahim's indicators, but the use is still quite low. And we see that this is particularly the case in Central Africa and in also in Northern Africa, and in Eastern, Western, and Southern Africa, it looks a bit better. So moving on from that part of this observed data policy gap, we have 3 major recommendations for statistical offices in the report. And it is important to state here at this stage that we always point at a challenge, but then we show also a very positive spotlight and progress, and we give examples for these challenges and recommendations that we put forward. So the first point that we wanted to make is that it is important to institutionalize statistical capacity and create a strategy in order to raise funds. Because we know the challenge is that there has been an increase in funding. We know that Africa as a continent receives the largest share of official development assistance to statistics. It's over 50%. And over the past decade, there has been an increase. But we also know that this is concentrated in certain countries. We also know that the national strategies for development of statistics in Africa, some countries still do not manage to fully fund the NSDS processes. And finally, and this is also key to mention, is the global data demands of the SDG. SDGs are just incredibly high and requires further funding in order to fill those information gaps. So what we suggest in terms of a couple of strategies that the report puts forward is first to get a strategic capacity strategy with objectives clear to signal funding needs to development partners. This one way of doing this is the NSDS. We also think that there has to be a big focus on mobilized domestic funding, for instance, by having an office inside the NSO focused on partnerships and fundraising. And we have seen successful initiatives such as national trust funds in Mali to raise additional domestic funding for statistics. We also think there's a big gain in optimizing funding allocation. We're looking at sample sizes of surveys, reducing the application of data production, and specifically align objectives with development partners and policymakers. So improving coordination. All that you will find specific chapters in the report. The second point we want to make is we want to really reinforce that it is key to connect to knowledge banks to retain and hire talent in the NSO and in the NSS in general. And I want to show you a graph from a survey that Paris 21 undertook in 2018 with the help of the UNSD, because we know there are positive developments, but we also know that there's a core challenge in, first of all, hiring highly skilled workforce capable of working in an NSS, but also keeping them, avoid a high turnover, and training them. And we do think there are opportunities here, and this graph shows us a bit which ones, because the good news is that we see here in this graph as well that in Africa, workshops and on-the-job training and technical assistance missions and formal education programs actually more used than recruiting new staff. And of course, that doesn't mean that recruitment is not happening, but I think what is important is there are more chances now also with the pandemic to move to on-the-job trainings and to move especially to e-learning. So we think there's a big chance in improving targeted e-learning, improving targeted e-learning programs. There is a chance to build strategic partnerships with academia and universities. We have seen these regional training centers coming up, and also partnerships with universities in Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal that are highly successful, and also to engage more in peer learning across continents. There have been amazing initiatives in the past year, and we think there's some more opportunity to move there. And then finally, and I know I'm already a bit over time, so I will keep it short. And that's also what Johannes mentioned, is we need to build good data narratives for better data use. We highlighted the challenge often that we speak about, we need to make data openly available and accessibly in a user-friendly format. And we also show data and analysis from the Open Data Watch in the report. But we think that open data initiatives is a big step, and they are good, but sometimes also small steps can make a big difference. And it can start with targeted communication strategies and the use of different media channels. There are amazing examples that we also showcase in the report. And some NSOs have even engaged in structural transformation with really setting up statistical offices have set up communication and dissemination offices of data and statistics, and we believe these were the 3 key recommendations that we put in the report from the statistical perspective. And my colleagues from Ibrahim Foundation will now show how this links also to the policymaking perspective, and in order to bridge the gap. So I stop here and I'm handing over to Camila and Diego. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Julia. Let me share my screen with our presentation. Voila. You should be able to see it. Can you confirm quickly? Can you see the screen? Full. Okay, fantastic. So we are now building on what Julia just took us through. We are now focusing on what are the key takeaways of our report for African policymakers. Just very quickly, as you might know, one of the core missions of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation is really this commitment to strengthening African governance. And here we want to showcase, as a sort of starting point for the discussion, this strong link that exists between strong statistical capacity and good governance performance. This is a correlation that sort of puts together, on the one hand, the Ibrahim Index of African Governance scores for overall governance and the indicator which measures the capacity of statistical systems across African countries. As you can see, there is a strong correlation between these 2 elements, signaling that basically countries that are capable of producing high quality statistics tend to score better, tend to perform better when it comes to delivering public goods and services to their citizens, which for the Mo Ibrahim Foundation is the essence of the governance relationship. This is like an entry point and an additional sort of highlight of why we are so committed and why we are so interested in working on the data landscape in Africa. Here we have the foundation's chairman and founder, Mo Ibrahim, and this is one of the key lines that have been sort of emerging throughout the publications and the work that the Mo Ibrahim has been doing since the last 10, 13 years. As Natalie was recalling in the keynote, there is no sound policy without sound data. And this, here you can see one of like the key highlights from one of Mo's interventions recently. And it's really like this whole idea that without data, policymakers drive blind, as sort of, if you don't count, if you don't know how many citizens you need to serve, your policies will never really meet the needs, the basic needs of your constituencies. Just a quick recap, as we have already covered during the conversation, statistical capacity remains low in Africa. There has been, and this is a key point, there has been improvement over the past decade, because if we look at the World Bank data, we can see that in the period 2004 and all the way until 2019, the score for the continental average has been increasing, and this is a very good progress to note. However, when we look at how Africa compares to the rest of the world, this is where we see that capacity remaining relatively weaker and relatively lower compared to the potential. The reason why this conversation is all the more important, and here obviously I'm repeating what has already been said by colleagues, is that we are now at a point in which not only, for instance, COVID-19 is sort of highlighting the need for data, for tracking, for measuring, and for appropriate responses, but also all the way until 2030 and 2063, Africa has signed up to specific commitments, specific political, economic, and social commitments, which will determine the future of the continent. And these commitments obviously happen through specific targets that help the continent measuring their performance. And this entails a huge demand for data, and for data that are obviously accurate, and then are obviously then feeding into policy processes in order for African countries to meet those very sort of ambitious objectives all the way to 2030 and 2063. So on the basis of this, we have then sort of created 3 recommendations directed to African policymakers. And now my colleague Diego, which is a senior analyst at the foundation, will take you through the challenges and the recommendations that we have identified. Thank you.
Thank you, Camilla.
Let's fix 1 second this. Okay.
Thank you. So, like in addition to the 3 challenges, can you hear me?
Yes.
In addition to the 3 challenges, like pertaining national statistical offices that like Julia talk about, in the second part of this report, we also outline 3 main challenges that need addressing to enhance the use of data in policy making. The first one of those challenges is a lack of census data and weak administrative data systems. African countries have made a lot of progress in carrying out censuses. In the 2010 round of the UN's population and housing census, 47 African countries conducted population censuses, up from 38 in the 2000 round. However, there are still a number of African countries where a population and housing census has not been conducted since 1990, such as DRC, Eritrea, and Somalia. Moreover, around 493.6 million Africans in sub-Saharan Africa are unregistered. This is over half the global unregistered population. The main recommendation stemming from this challenge is valuing and investing in the basic building blocks of statistics. And how we propose to achieve this in this report is by prioritizing investment in the basic building blocks of statistics to ensure that no one is left behind, setting up frameworks that ensure that policymakers have access to basic administrative data when designing, implementing, and evaluating policies, and working with international and regional organizations to develop a statistical capacity. The second one of those challenges is the fact that the legal frameworks are not keeping up with a new data ecosystem where a large volume of data, an increasingly large volume of data is being produced and used by actors outside the national statistical system. In most African countries that do provide legislation on data protection and privacy, the legal documents remain very general. Strong information laws and frameworks are largely absent from African countries, some exceptions are Sierra Leone, Tunisia, South Africa, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Malawi. The main recommendation here is to establish data governance frameworks and regulatory policies that are robust with some key data protection elements such as the right of choice and consent, the right to access and correct, and the right to redress, as well as certain degree of flexibility and adaptability. And the third challenge pertains to the digital divide and poor data literacy, which is still very pervasive on the African context as well as at a global scale. Most people in Africa still lack access to ICTs. Africa's average in the latest telecommunications infrastructure index from UNDESA amounts only to 0.37 out of 1. This is the worst regional average. In addition to this, many African government officials still lack access to ICTs or the skills needed to use those ICTs in order to be able to perform their work duties optimally. The main recommendation stemming from this third challenge is the need to invest in strengthening data literacy and ICT access among policymakers. How we propose to do this is by expanding investment in regular access to basic information and communication technologies, and by helping government officials get adequate training to develop better data skills. Thank you.
Sasha, you are muted.
Thanks very much, colleagues. Thanks. So this has been an excellent introduction into the report and a snapshot view of the issues. I think we've heard a very clear call that good statistics lead to good governance, and you've seen some evidence of that. We have a very clear evidence that data demands are on the increase with Agenda 2063, the SDGs, and other things. And we've had a bit of a glimpse into some of the main issues, legal framework, storytelling, strengthening foundational data, getting and retaining talent, building their capacity, and improving data literacy. So it's an extremely complicated issue with many facets, but I think what's great about the report is that it breaks it down into really 6 concrete, practical recommendations that address a broad range of the issues. So we've heard about the big picture view. We've heard about, we've dived very shallowly into the report, and I think now we're going to go much deeper and get a real on-the-ground perspective from our main discussants here today. So with that, I'm very pleased to turn things over to Mr. Alex Shimuafeni, who's the Statistician General of Namibia. Alex, I wonder if you could tell us, based on this report, if you could share with us some concrete experiences of the NSO of Namibia, where you've implemented steps to collaborate more closely with your government, whether it's to mobilize funds or to improve the use of statistics. Alex, over to you. So I see now that Alex is having a few technical issues. Let me just check.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I was muted, I think. And
welcome, okay, Alex. Sure, we can hear you now. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much, and for the opportunity. And yes, the report is very interesting to us because it talks about the new data sources, especially now in the COVID era. It talks about strategic partnerships for skills transfer, learning from each other, and also really the strategic partnership also, which will subsequently lead to fundraising, both locally and internationally. Maybe just to speak more about the collaboration with the government and policymakers for domestic funding and data use. We started engaging the government in advocating the importance of statistics as an agency, statistics agency, established for providing data for policy making and evidence-based decision making. Now, the fortunate thing is that my predecessor, the former Statistician General, was employed as the, maybe some 5 years back, was employed as the economic advisor for the president. And that my predecessor made sure that the president always made sure that he made use of Namibia Statistics Agency figures for policy making, and we could always hear about this in his speeches. Now, that initiative of advocating with government it assisted us a lot in creating awareness of the Namibia Statistics Agency. Something that ensured that the agency became well positioned in the minds of the data users or the population as large, because previously we were really just seen as an agency that does census, and when it does census, people were referring to us as an agency that was counting people and not even looking at the housing side of the census. Now, we had to reposition to speak about the importance of the Namibia Statistics Agency. And now, if you look at the Statistics Act also, the Act is emphasizing a lot on the coordination of the national statistical system, which we try to implement by signing memorandum of understandings with the government, with the stakeholders, which is especially the government itself and the government agencies, just to formalize those that relationship. And it helped because through those relationships, formalized relationship, you by default also create awareness in terms of data that is available, and also ensure that the data is used, the usability of the data. Now, as part of the coordination of the NSS, we also developed the National Strategy for the Development of Statistics, the NSDS, which we use to capacitate the various sectors of the NSS. Now, from the report, with regards to the new data sources, Namibia was forced basically by COVID-19 to look at different ways of collecting data. When we talk about things like the CPI data collection, when we had total lockdowns, we had to improvise of collecting either looking at almost the aspect of scanner data. And also, if you look at the data collection for surveys, we also needed to improvise. And by default, we needed to look at now the new data sources. Now, as part of the new data sources that came about because of COVID-19, we were doing, for example, we did a study on human mobility using mobile phone data. This was a study of a partnership between one of the local mobile companies, ourselves, the Namibia Statistics Agency, as well as Mindflow, a company called Mindflow. And this is a new source of data that was not there in previously, the mobile phone data in the case of Namibia. Now, Namibia Statistics Agency was also looking at the possibility of cooperating with some of the international companies like the Airbus for the use of Earth observations to do some estimations, especially when we talk about the SDG indicators, of which some of the data we do not have. One of the specific things that we're looking at trying to estimate poverty, looking at the type of housing of the population in Namibia. And one key strategic partnership also that I wanted to mention that we recently signed the agreement with, the MOU with, is with the National Statistics Office. The Office for National Statistics of the UK, where the emphasis of this agreement or the MOU is more on data science. And I'm excited about that because we are also looking at issues of big data and also new sources of data. Now, coming back to the report also, and also something that goes with funding is, I was very much impressed with the example of Mali. Mali's National Fund for the Development of Statistics is a very good example that Namibia as a country, I believe we should emulate. Now, the only challenge that we might face in Namibia is that there's already a perception that the country has a lot of taxes that is applied to the taxpayers. But personally, I also believe that with the right advocacy in terms of the importance of statistics, we should be able to pull it through also. And I think we need to learn from Mali also in terms of how they dealt with those challenges when they started implementing it. Now, the report also referred to e-governance in Africa, and some of the challenges that I foresee about that e-governance in Africa is that, especially for a country like Namibia, it's a vast country, and we have some marginalized people staying in the most remotest places of the country, and they could miss out on some of these digitization because of accessibility to the technology and also the effort to get to the service points. We spoke earlier about deaths registration and birth registrations. We have a challenge of some of the births that are happening at homes that are not registered with the government. Although Namibia, we've got a very high percentage of reach out in terms of the births and deaths registration, but about 5% of that we still need to get to those remote areas. Now, finally, the overall funding of statistics in Namibia still remains a challenge, mainly because we have other competing needs. For example, when COVID came, government needed to reprioritize the expenditure. But then I feel that it's our obligation then as a statistics agency to continue advocating and demonstrate the importance of statistics as an investment for good policy making, as well as for potential investors that need to come in, because we all know even potential investors, they cannot deal without statistics. And thus the government just need to fund statistics much better. With that, I submit. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was really, really, really insightful, really informative. I think the things that you shared probably echo the perspectives and the situation that a lot of colleagues around the table have faced. COVID forcing new ways of doing things to find new efficiencies. And find new ways to collect data in particular. So I think that's especially interesting. I really like the approach of having an MOU to formalize a relationship and create awareness with the government in order to strengthen that partnership and ensure visibility among the NSO. So thank you, Alex, for that excellent introduction. And I think I'm sure there will be many questions for you from the audience. Again, everyone, please type your questions in the Q&A. I know you've sparked my interest, and I have some questions for you as well. But before we get to that, I'm pleased to introduce Philippe Gafishi, who is the Interregional Coordinator here at Paris 21 and the former Statistician General of Rwanda. Philippe is going to talk to us about a little bit more about the report. And Philippe, I have a specific question for you, really. That is, what can we do to strengthen the use of statistics and strengthen relationships between statistical offices and policymakers? As somebody who's gone from the NSO world now to some extent to the other side of the equation, now working to help strengthen those relationships from an intergovernmental perspective. Philippe, over to you.
Sorry, thank you very much, Sasha, for this opportunity. And first of all, let me commend Mo Ibrahim Foundation and Paris 21 for this very important report, which provides a clear roadmap, as was described by Johannes and Mo Ibrahim. And this provides actually very, very specific roadmap and recommendations for African countries to bridge the data policy gap in times of COVID-19, but also beyond. So these are indeed long-term recommendations, and they provide also guidance for the Agenda 2063 and the SDGs monitoring. So as you can see the report, they cover a range of areas of statistics, from strengthening capacity of the national statistical systems and the National Statistics Office to fit for purpose, to be able to respond to data demand, to partnership with academic institutions and private sector, touching very specifically data use in policy decisions, but also very importantly, highlighting the legal framework which are conducive to data sharing, storage, and management and of new data sources, but also protecting the privacy of citizens. So these are very important areas that can help national statistical offices, but also decision makers to get well the role of data and statistics in development. So maybe let me take just a step back. It's like a virtuous data cycle, indeed. The more we ask for data, the better and the more targeted we will aim at producing them. Because if there is no demand, then there will not be data production. But we know that there is already indeed data demand, increasing too much, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic, but also in addition to development agendas like national development plans, regional development plans, and global development plans, in addition to what has been created by the COVID-19. So this is like a very heavy task for national statistical offices to respond to this demand. So for that, the country should own the instruments and the initiatives to get this data demand produced in high quality, and also instruments and initiatives that can help to get this production process and dissemination and use in a more sustainable manner. And I think Julia has highlighted, and Alex as well, the need for a more sustainable strategic planning, which can make sure that all these initiatives are planned for within a short term, or let's say a medium term perspective. And there are some countries in Africa that has already implemented some good initiatives to promote and strengthen that kind of data systems for development. And you have already, Julia has presented already the case for Mali, which has a statistics legislation that creates the Statistics Development Fund, which is actually regulating the activities, I mean, the huge activities that are being implemented in Mali, and the government is putting money in that basket, I mean, in that fund, and it works. So there are good examples that can help to promote the production of data. But let me also give you an example of Rwanda in terms of legal frameworks. Rwanda, for example, has revised its legal framework, its Statistics Act, let me say that, 3 times within about 15 years, just to accommodate the new data areas of concern. And by doing this, Rwanda has also enacted the data revolution policy, and that was in 2017. And this was just to see how they can use alternative data and also use the big data for official reporting. And this data revolution policy is already embedded in their NSDS process. And for the policy makers actually to be involved in statistics, they have to know what is going on. And for Rwanda, the NSDS is not only headed by policymakers, but it is also adopted by the cabinet. And it is therefore integrated and is part of the country medium-term development strategy. So this is a way where policymakers can be involved in statistical development and then use the data. What comes after is that once they are involved in the strategy and they integrate it in the development policy, they will fund it, and the National Statistics Office will be accountable to the government to produce the data because they get support from the government. So these are some kind of relationship that can be created. And also this will also create some kind of trust in the data which is produced, but also trust in the data communities that produce this data. So this is very key indeed. Another initiative was the creation of a data science campus in Rwanda. And this is an initiative which is being created in other countries also, like Ghana, like Kenya. Now Alex is talking also about the initiative in Namibia. So these are also some key initiatives that can help to create more data for use and to sensitize policymakers to use the data. Indeed, what is needed much more here to make sure that the next step of the recommendations are to ensure that data are produced, but they are most used. Because if they are produced, they are not used, then there's no need. And that means that they are not aligned to the demand. So this implies that national statistical offices should make sure that the data produced are turned into a meaningful, consumable products for decision-making and create efficient communication of the data. But also statistical offices should make sure, or let me say, decision makers should make sure that national statistical offices are at the driving seat on linking data production to data needs and use for development. Because sometimes in the development dialogue, national statistical offices are left behind. And linking the data demand to the data use, if they are not involved in the dialogue, that will be a very complicated task. Now, coming to the question on whether Paris 21 can play a role on this. Of course, yes, Paris 21, as you know, is a partner that, of course, support countries based on their needs. So the focus is to support the national statistical systems based on their needs. But also, we advocate for data-driven policymaking by engaging policymaking in the NSDSs, also supporting use of data in decentralized policy decisions, in decentralized policy-making units. And more importantly, I will mention the advocacy for better financing for data for development. To conclude, I will say that the report provides very good recommendations on capacity development initiatives, targeting both policymakers as well as NSOs in order to create synergy and raise awareness on the role of better data and statistics for better lives for all. I really invite the participants, all of you, to read this report. It's quite interesting. Thank you very much, Sasha.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Philippe. I think you shared with us two extremely exciting examples: this data revolution policy and data science campus. I really like that you emphasize the idea that we need to start from the user perspective and work backwards. It's not just about producing data for the sake of producing data, but understanding how it's interpreted and consumed by people, and that should really be the starting point. I also really liked that you talked about embedding policymakers in the statistical development process. And I think this is something, Alex, you touched on as well through the MOU. It's really important about bridging those two worlds and actually forging those relationships, finding openings for policymakers to get involved in the data process, to understand what goes in there, understand what the needs are. And that's really a good way to strengthen and to build, to establish and maintain long-term relationships. So I'm extremely conscious of the time. Thank you everyone for bearing with us. I think we just have a few minutes left, and what I'd like to do is, first of all, thanks to everyone who's submitted questions in the Q&A. Unfortunately, we only have time to get through, I think, one question per panelist at the moment, but we will endeavor to respond to you, to the rest via the chat. I do want to give Johannes sufficient time to wrap things up and to give his perspectives as well. So Philippe, if I may start with you with a question. You talked a lot about the NSDS and the planning cycle. COVID-19 has obviously disrupted planning for many NSDS. They have obviously new challenges and new constraints, obviously, and also new demands. So I was wondering if you could maybe share just a very brief perspective on how COVID-19 has disrupted the NSDS planning process, and maybe give some advice to countries that are in the midst or embarking on an NSDS now in the COVID context. Thanks.
Thanks, Sasha. I will be very brief. Yes, the COVID-19 has disrupted the implementation of the NSDS in many, many countries. And this actually calls for reviewing and adapting the NSDS according to the current situation. So many NSOs and the NSS has started already working on this, repurposing the objectives of the NSDS to cover the key areas that were brought about the COVID-19. So the NSDS should be seen as a dynamic document and a strategy which should be adapted to any situation. And we have also developed some guidelines on how you can adapt the NSDS according to what has been brought by the COVID-19. We can share that just brief guidelines. And also there are some examples on developing a strategy for statistics in a crisis time, which can be anything like the COVID-19, but also the guidelines on developing NSDSs for the fragile situation of states or countries. So to just wrap up, this is the NSDS should be seen as a dynamic document that should be adapted to the situations. And we are happy to support countries adapting this to the consequences from the COVID-19. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Philippe. That's great. I'm sure that's anyone who's interested in support like that, please feel free to reach out via email or via the chat as well. Alex, I'd like to turn to you now, just in the last few minutes. So one of the things you spoke about was, how COVID has forced you to integrate new data sources. Now, obviously, one of the things the report talks about is is building the capacity of staff and ensuring that that you maintain that capacity and that talent. In the context of new data sources, this is a bit of a new area. There's a lot of questions around governance, legal frameworks, data protection, all these issues. I was just wondering some of the ways, and maybe you can provide some advice to other NSOs who are looking at incorporating telecoms data, satellite data, how you ensure data protection issues, and also how you capacitate NSO staff to then deal with that data.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Maybe just the first one was I want to mention about the issue of a new data source. The good thing about the new data source is the advantage to that is that it can also come in cheaper than the traditional way of collecting data. Because we all know surveys and so on are very much expensive. And then the issue of governance and data protection is that we, as NSOs, we are led by the fundamental principles of the of official statistics, which is the UN fundamental principles, and issues of anonymity, confidentiality, and those they comes in there. So on the governance side of things, we are already led by that, and I think it's much easier to, if you need to come up with laws, because now that we have news sources, I think we just need to implement now the new laws based on those principles of official statistics. And the issue also of data protection also goes in terms of confidentiality that you talk about, because, for example, if I may mention that from the Namibia Statistics Agency, and I'm sure this is with the other NSOs also, is that all employees, including myself, we sign the oath of secrecy when we talk about, because we deal with confidential data. So we, by default also, we need, when we talk about data protection, I think it's something that we also need to guide on, or to make sure that that is also given. I think with that, I just want to summarize by saying that I think, yes, with the new sources, there are those type of challenges that are there. How do we deal with them? But for me, it's rather exciting challenges, as long as they can give you the results that we require. And obviously, finally, it's just a matter of also stakeholder engagement in terms of ensuring that all stakeholders are actually satisfied. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Alex. That's really, really excellent, really useful. So we're almost out of time, but I want to give Johannes a little bit of space to provide a high-level overview. Thanks again to everyone who's been submitting questions. We've had really a lot of action in the question box. Thanks very much, Ernie. I see a very poignant point about the kind of analysis gap where NSOs tend to have more ability to manage and analyze data, but less ability to kind of analyze the policy framework side. Policymakers conversely have access to that side of it, but lack access to the detailed data. So there's some synergies to be found there. Sekou, thanks very much, mentioned that the NSDS evaluation process was insightful and helped them to, I think, shape the way they do things, and so that's very useful. And finally, Sheriful, I think there's a great comment there too, that here calling for a meeting of bridging the data policy gap of South Asia. So of course there could be a data policy gap of South Asia, Latin America, Europe, North America, everywhere. The sky's the limit. So I'm glad to see that there's some nascent demand as well. On that note, I'm pleased to hand things back to Johannes, who will provide a summary and an overview. Thanks, Johannes.
Well, I think I will refrain from doing a summary of the summary. Sasha, I think you did a very good job, and I think all panelists and speakers have done a wonderful job to convince all the audience. And I'm amazed to see on a Friday afternoon Europe time and Friday morning time in the US, roughly 100 people constantly being listening, asking questions. And so even a topic about this very specific nature, to some extent, turning data into policy in Africa, has a community. And I saw many good friends and colleagues in the chat. So thank you so much for engaging. The next thing to do is obviously download the report, Twitter about the report, talk to your friends and colleagues, send it onwards. That's the next step to do to engage. Now, a bit more seriously, and this is maybe just the one point that's I wanted to close the circle to what I said in the beginning. We have to see that we are really at a fundamental change of thinking about development, and we should really realize that with the COVID pandemic, 30 years of development in Africa come to some extent to an end. I mean, the African countries have catched up. I mean, there was about the convergence theory, even in economic development. Now we see huge problems coming along, and you know the different channels. Now tourism, reduction in supply of minerals. There will be hardship coming. And I think we should stand ready to help African countries, but also, as we say, in other so-called, and the term is just so wrong, but for the simplicity of making the argument, developing countries, we need to think now to get debt relief, we need to think about inclusive recovery mechanisms, and we need to think about social protection. So those things, I'm pretty sure, will only be paid by taxpayers in the North if they are delivered efficiently. And for efficient delivery and important mechanisms, you need to have good data. You need to bridge the policy gap. Otherwise, it will not work. So I would like to conclude this with an appeal to all of you to make the extra effort with the storytelling, to make cases for these kind of inclusive recovery, social protection, insurance, universal basic income. This will come big time. This is the next debt relief issues and so on and so forth. The G20 is on it. There will be new measures coming. And I think if we are standing together with this, we can go a long way. And the last point on, because it was a very great question on financing capacity development, how can we get it funded? One point is what we do in the Paris 21 as one actor in the Bern network. I'm not sure whether everybody heard about the Bern network for more and better funding for development data. There is a specific initiative about the clearinghouse. It's a sort of platform. It will be a platform launched at the next UN World Data Forum, where you can find timely information about where to invest in data and statistics and where you get a lot of bang for your buck. And also where countries find, Alex, I mean, you raised this point, and Philip, where you get good information of how to invest from a country perspective and where you can find good information. So please be in touch also on this one. I really would like to thank you all for spending the time with us. And I'm wishing you all a wonderful end of Friday and happy end of Friday morning. So with this, thanks again to all panelists, to great work, great to the authors, of course. And final word, Sasha, back to you. And thanks, Natalie, for joining us in this endeavor. It was a great collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you. Just maybe one last point. It's not only a case for partners that we need to make, it's also a case for African governments to begin with. And I think this is key. Thank you. But thank you for having us. Indeed. It was a great discussion.
Thank you, Natalie. That's a very good point to go out on. Just one huge thanks to everyone again. And, everyone, please read the report. It's not a report just for today. It's a report for today and next year. And we'd love to learn from you, hear about some real practical experiences. And that I think will be the most useful thing. So please, let's keep the conversation open. We'd love to hear from governments who are implementing, from NSOs, about how things are going and to grow and all mutually learn from there. So thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your week or your weekend. Wish you all the best.